Major support for these programs is provided by Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, GREENBERG TRAURIG, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, Ackman Ziff Real Estate Group, LLC, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Cushman & Wakefield, Dimes Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Eastern Consolidated, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman, LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Giantomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Newmark Knight Frank, RAL Development Services, The Spandrel Group, LLC, Siami Development, SJP Properties, Site Comply, Sterling and Sterling, Stephen Napolitano, The WITKOFF Group, Urban American.
There are people who grew up in New York City who are unique. Sometimes, they are salesmen. Sometimes they're personalities. I have a person today, a Bronx boy, who's truly a personality, a unique individual. I have Paul Bernstein, the retired one of the founding partners of Sanford C. Bernstein, and a true philanthropist. Thanks for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
So wait a second.
But I have to say something.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do when I was in college. I didn't know what
Wait,
to do
we're not at
before I
college
went to college. So I took an aptitude test, and they said, don't be a salesman, be a veterinarian.
And you became a salesman?
And I became a salesman.
We'll get to how you became a salesman. But you were, okay, do I have to tell them your age?
I wish you would, because look at the way I look. I don't want them to think I'm 37.
Okay, so you were born in 1934.
Yep.
You were born in the Bronx.
Right on the Grand Concourse.
In the Grand Concourse, fancy Grand Concourse. Now, your parents, Jack and what was your mother's name?
Martha.
Martha. They met in Coney Island, right?
Yep.
And but all of a sudden they lived in the Grand Concourse. I mean, this
No,
was...
no, near the Grand Concourse. There's a big difference. No, there's a big difference.
But you told me when you were going to school, you must have been an interesting... You had a doorman in the Grand Concourse?
I said not the Grand Concourse, Sheridan Avenue.
Sheridan Avenue.
There was a doorman there and an elevator man for a very short time.
Now, Dad was in the jewelry business.
My father worked in a jewelry store and eventually became a very moderate partner.
And his specialty was watches.
He was the biggest dumper of Bulliver watches during the war. A particular watch company would sell them to my father for cash, and there was a 20% excise tax, and I used to wind those watches.
So tell me about, where did you go to public school?
I went to public school, PS 35, across the street from a wonderful parochial school. Then I went to PS 90. Then I went to William Howard Taft. And then I went to NYU.
Wait a second, before we get to NYU, but you were privileged. You even went
Privileged.
to camp.
I went to camp.
You went to camp.
I went to Camp Deerfield in Berlington, Vermont. I think it was $175. And I'm kind of the way I am today because at one particular summer, my brother was my counselor.
So now your parents say, your brother, he went to Harvard, he went,
well,
he went a variety of places, but he was also at Harvard. He was, what, 8 years older than you?
Almost 9.
And what happens is, Jack and Martha said, "Hey, our small son Paul, we have to keep him in the city. We can't send him out to Boston. You know, he's too, you know, he's shy, he's naive, you know." And you end up at NYU.
That's not exactly what happened. My brother met a lovely French girl in 1948 in a sort of modern Orthodox family, and my brother got married to this wonderful Roman Catholic lady in 1948. That didn't happen too often.
So,
Slept a rabbi there, and my father said, "You're staying in the city."
now, was your brother a member of Pi Lam, or were you a member of Pi Lam Phi?
Boy, you did some good work. My brother was not only a member, he was the head macher there for a while.
And then you got involved with
AE Pi.
AE Pi at NYU.
Downtown. He was uptown.
So what were you doing when you were going to NYU? You were living at home in the Bronx?
Yep.
Or was it that time that Jack was able to move to Forest Hills?
We moved to Forest Hills because Riverdale was a little too fancy for us. And it was $140, I think, a month. And I now go to a periodontist in that building.
So you go to Regal Park, and you're
What do you mean Regal Park?
No,
This
Forest
was
Hills.
Forest Hills. Regal Park is also
Right. So
like Sheridan Avenue.
So you went to Forest Hills, and you're going to NYU. And what were you going to college for? You had no idea. What, you became an accountant, right?
No, I had an accounting master's or whatever you call it, and also an economic background a little bit and a little marketing. I even ended up selling Scholastica rings in college. I sold everything.
You know what? I used to sell that.
Really?
Really, I sold
but
college
accountant?
rings.
No.
No, but it was an easy way. You know, I used to carry the ring sizer
It's a
around.
great way to meet people.
That's exactly right. You know, it was a good.
I made some of them my clients.
Later on. So now, you graduate college what year?
56.
And what you decided to go into the military?
I didn't decide. You had to wait around those days for the draft, or you. So I went to the Navy, but I was turned down, and volunteered for draft in the Army.
And where do you end up? Fort Dix at the beginning?
Go to Fort Dix, and I was one of the lucky few. Being a Bronx boy, you knew the games. I flew to Europe both ways, flew and came back. And they sent me to Fort Harrison, which was a real experience.
Where was Fort Harrison?
In a suburb of Indianapolis. It was the finance center of the United States, and they had a typing and shorthand school there. And the Army was extremely bright at that time. Almost everyone in the class was a Korean, a Japanese, an Indonesian, a Chinese person that could do all that writing. And you took typing classes every week and steno classes. And if you failed what they felt you should be up to, you went to Korea. I didn't fail. I graduated #1, and I could have gone to any embassy. I was offered Bermuda, but it sounded boring to me, you know, from the Bronx. What am I doing Bermuda? Or I could work for a general or a lieutenant colonel. And for a very short while, I was working with General Norstad, who was the head of SHAPE, and I was a court-martial clerk for him. And I then...
Is this in America or in Germany?
In Germany. In France, actually. SHAPE was in... but then I ended up in Germany with a lieutenant colonel, and that was a lot of fun. I loved it.
And then so what year did you finish the military?
I don't know if I should tell you I was court-martialed. I don't think I
No, I'm not sure if we really want to get to the court-martial.
What year
But you did finish.
I don't know, 58.
So you graduated. So you're
57.
57. You have an accounting degree, you have an economics degree, and you have a brother who was a research guy, and you get a job where? Wait, White Weld, you try to look for a job?
Well, my brother at that time was working at Food Fair in Philadelphia, and he got me an interview at White Weld, which was a very fine firm. And I was kind of nervous, and I went up to to this interview, and Mr. Weld was a very patient young man, and at one point he said, "You know, son, you should be playing a piano in a brothel." And I thanked him very much, and I said a couple of words to him with, I don't believe you can say on television. And he went out of business, and Sanford Bernstein became quite a company.
Yeah, but
And I went to Eastman Dillon also, but they were nice to me.
then?
My brother knew Jack Dreyfus, who was just a fabulous, fabulous guy.
What was Dreyfus like at that time, the company?
Well, it was the Dreyfus Fund. Jack made everyone buy Polaroid. A very, very interesting, real mensch of a guy. Didn't belong in Wall Street. He was so nice. And I was a broker there. And fortunately, my dad had a salesman from Longines Watch of a Sholem. His name was Harry Sutland. And Harry would bet on every baseball game you can imagine. He was a great guy. But wherever he went to a store, he said, you have to do business with Paul Bernstein.
So he was your shill.
He was, well, I don't like that word.
I won't.
No, I object to that.
No. Okay, he was your promoter.
Listen, I sat with stockbrokers that would call up a man and recommend a stock and call up someone else and tell them to sell it short. Now, if you do that enough times, you're going to do very well with someone. I had a wonderful business. I had a couple of guys that were nuts, that loved to trade 1,000 shares a day. In and out, I just took orders. And I was able to build a heck of a book of odd lot people.
So when do you leave Dreyfus?
1960.
And you go to Oppenheimer?
I go to Oppenheimer because Jack Dreyfus decided one day to cut the commissions. They're going to have fancy newspaper, printing stuff, and all kind of nonsense. I went to Oppenheimer. And about a year or so later, or maybe even less, I was fortunate enough to be making more money than my brother, who was a vice president of Food Fair. He comes to Oppenheimer in the research department. Now, he had originally gone to Arnold Bernhard, which is the value line.
Value line.
And they wouldn't hire him. So he said, look, I'm going to sit here and do some work. You don't have to pay me. And he wrote a report on Dow Chemical, became somewhat famous. And that's how he got to Food Fair. And he then came to Oppenheimer, which had, I believe, the greatest research department ever at that time put together.
Now, when did Dad join?
My father, well, I don't know that you would say he joined. I don't think he was an employee of Oppenheimer. I really don't know. But my dad's business he was in the jewelry business on the Lower East Side, which changed dramatically and everyone moved uptown. And the business went bad. And my brother, who was making interesting money at the time and a very interesting institutional salesman, agreed to pay my father $50,000 a year, but he had to sit next to me. I was a broker. So my dad sat next to me and schmoozed a couple of people with 2 shares of this and 10 shares of that.
Yeah, but you had a great relationship with your mother and father, and it was a good place to be that he was there with you when you were working.
Well, it was, as a son, it was a nice thing to help a father. I had a very good relationship with my parents, and along the way, my mother in particular pleaded with my brother to be nicer to me. We had an interesting relationship.
So now what happens? One day your brother says, you know what, I'm a real big research guy, and I'm going to open up something called Sanford C. Bernstein. What happened?
Well, that's not exactly what happened.
Okay, so tell me.
I don't really know what happened. My brother decides to leave Oppenheimer and goes to work with another company called Ralphie Samuel, which was a German-Jewish firm. Now remember, this is the 60s. This is a total different time of the world. And they hired him to try to market the firm. They were dealing principally with very wealthy German-Jewish people. I don't know what happened, but it didn't last. And my brother decided to start a firm. I knew nothing about it. And he started it with a gentleman named Archie Sherrill, who was at that point running the Oppenheimer Fund, and Stanley Edgner, who I would say was one of the greatest salesmen I've ever met. And there were 3 of them. The 2 of them, not my brother, hired me. And we started.
And subsequently they left, right?
They left after 6 months. Archer was a buyer of stock when he was at the Oppenheimer Fund. At Bernstein, we had $2 million to manage, so he didn't have much to buy. And Stanley was offered a very good position at Neuberger Berman, and I would say in the first year, 100 to 200 people left the firm. I mean, it was a revolving door. My brother was interesting, very difficult to work for.
Now, then there was this guy, Shep Ostrow, who joined your brother with Lou Sanders, right?
About 5 or 6 months after starting the firm, and the other two left, my brother was seriously contemplating closing the business. We didn't have much of a business. And we heard that Shep, Roger, Lou, and a lovely guy named Shelley Lawrence were going to leave the firm and start their own company. My brother spoke to them and convinced them to come join us rather than start a company.
And what Shep said, and he said this in a number of letters, he said, the only asset besides the research of your brother was the salesman who happened to be you.
I was the only salesman for the firm.
So what happens then? So then the firm
Well,
grows.
from 7
But
people.
wasn't it that, you know, one of the things, and as I said to you before, when Alan Stillman opened up Smith & Walensky, he did something which institutionalized and changed the restaurant business. He put an ad in, because, you know, and he put an ad saying, Palm, Chris Sella, Smith & Walensky, at last with this competition. And basically, your brother, I mean, he put that ad, the Bernstein.
We had a full-page ad in the Times that was basically blank. And in the middle, it said Bernstein with a square period. And on the bottom, almost difficult to read, it said a new firm for investment research and money management. Research was always the first thing in his mind. And I mean, two of the gentlemen that came, particularly Lou Sanders, and Roger, who were trained and knew my brother at Oppenheimer, were brilliant in research, a different kind of research than has ever been developed in Wall Street.
Now, the interesting thing, you know, you had an executive team, an executive committee. You were one of the few firms that would have your own in-house shrink?
Well, we were the first firm, to my knowledge, that moved uptown.
Right, you went to 711 Fifth Avenue.
You had to be below Chambers Street. And a wonderful mistake. We were offered a floor in the General Motors building, a whole floor, 38,000 feet for 25 years at $10. Very good deal, because when we finally moved there, it was $60 a feet for 10 years. What was the question?
The question was, you know, that when you went over there, the firm was, you know, was a research firm.
Well, we were managing money.
Yeah, right, you were managing money.
On discretion.
Right, but you had to shrink. Okay, this
He
was
came every
unusual.
Wednesday.
He came and what was the role of the shrink?
Well,
of the firm?
it was my brother's shrink. And this shrink actually had a vote on the executive committee that if
He had to vote on the executive committee, but not on the investment committee, I hope.
Thank God. Sandy had a unique way of interviewing people. He was an absolute perfectionist, a brilliant guy, but it was his way or no way, and he could turn on a dime. And this shrink was there to sort of protect him against the world. I went with my brother thinking I'll protect him against the world. That's how nuts I was.
But, you know, the real interesting situation was you were the salesman who helped create this organization to grow. There was no question. And you had some very interesting stories during the way. And I think one of the interesting stories is that you talked to me about, you know, before you retired from the firm, is prior to the 1987 crash, you get a phone call or there was no email.
I got a letter.
You got a letter from this person in China.
I had
Japan.
It was an interesting, you know, as a salesman, you sort of have, it's a game of getting a particular account. And I worked like heck to get a particular Chinese man, and I loved the family. I got the account. He lived in Englewood and also in Hong Kong. And one day I get a letter. And it was in either the end of 66, when was the break?
87.
86 or 87. And it's a torn piece of paper gee, my cousin Bob says you're very smart with a check of $5 million. I called this gentleman up, and I would say if I didn't go to see him, he would be a client for somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes, because we were a value dividend discount account, a money management rather. Bought stocks many times that were out of favor, cutting the dividends, but the research over a period of cycles, we could see that there was something there. You didn't make a lot of money, but buying those kind of stocks, you never got hurt. So I went to Hong Kong. Didn't have salesman there never had an expense account, and with a wife of mine, and I brought back $15 million more. And then when I came back, the market had broke while I was there, and took me 38 hours to get back, a very interesting way. My brother was quite annoyed that I went, and it was really the beginning of serious problems between my brother and I, having nothing to do with the business. I mean, I was never recognized at all.
And subsequently, basically leave. But let's go to in the early 60s, you were talking to me about, I mean, you've been involved with many charities, but the amount of trips you've made to Russia. Talk to me about that.
Well, I was going to Russia the first time with an organization that, believe it or not, Steve Green was involved with, and I was just going over to see what's it all about. It was.
But you made 33 trips. I mean,
well, this was
unless you were in the
for
vodka
fun.
business. You know.
No. This was for fun. And subsequently, I knew Fred Stein from Oppenheimer, whose mother was one of 7, and only one stayed in Russia. So he asked if I would go. I was going really because I had heard about this organization, Concerned Citizens for Soviet Jewry. It was the heavy refusnik area. I visited his mother. I visited some refusniks, and just fell in love with the concept, and went a number of times.
And as you said to me in the sock, a little.
Well, I brought Fred's aunt and her husband and 2 children that were getting married, lived in one room. It was really something to see. Reminded me a little bit about my dad on 123 Henry Street. And I had $100 bills, 1,000 over here. Those days it was, well, I had some interesting stories going into Russia, but I also brought a Polaroid camera. And I remember his aunt saying, my God, we hit the jackpot, because $1,000 in American money then was extraordinary. I mean, this was the height of shortages and the whole shtick.
Now, how'd you get involved with Seeds of Peace?
How did I get involved with this? Malcolm Thompson, who worked for the firm, one day said to me, why don't we go to a dinner at the, how would you like to meet King Hussein? I said, gee, I'd love to meet him, because I had at the time a very good friend who was from Jordan. And it was a Seeds of Peace event. And I remember there was a show on The King, what was the show with Yul Brynner?
King and I.
The King and I.
But that was many years before.
Well, but there was a gentleman that was on Broadway there that night, and he said, gee, I've never entertained in front of a king before. And it was an amazing event that was held in the old Rainbow Room, it was just an unbelievable event. And I loved the concept, and I became very involved.
For my audience, explain the concept.
Seeds of Peace, John Wallach, who was a journalist in Washington, D.C., felt that if there would ever be peace in the Middle East, you have to plant the seed. So he brought over hundreds of Palestinians, Jordanians, Egyptians, and Israelis, and Indians and Pakistanis, children from conflict, to live together for a few weeks in a camp in Maine. And it's been around, must be 14, 15 years now. And it's beautiful. Never had a problem. And if I may, because I think it's appropriate for the times we're in now, the country of Albania is the only country in the world when the Germans came in and said, we'd like a list of your Jewish people. They said, we don't have any. And over 2,000 people were saved. This has been authenticated by Yad Vashem and the whole story. And I felt the world has to know that there are good Muslims in this world. It's time. And I helped publish a book called Besa, B-E-S-A, which you can, it's a beautiful book if you want to put it on a cocktail table, about families. It's a picture and a story of the people that saved Jews and Jewish children. We've made a movie. The government just gave us $500,000. I think it can, to clean it up, I think it can win an Oscar next year. I think it's important that the world knows that there was some good Muslims, and Matthew Goldstein is helping us. We're going to have classes in colleges and a lot of high schools in September throughout America about Muslims that help Jews.
So, you know, for the kid from the Bronx, you know, who truly made it on the street, as they would say, in the street.
I was a street kid.
And have had an interesting life. I'd like to say thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Major support for these programs is provided by Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, and Perfect Building Maintenance, New York Community Bank, All Nation Renovation, Kilroy Architectural Windows, New York's Window Company, GREENBERG TRAURIG, LLP, M&T Bank. Additional support is provided by AVR Realty Company, LLC, Ackman Ziff Real Estate Group, LLC, Bingham McCutcheon, LLP, Briarwood Organization, Capital One Bank, C.B. Richard Ellis, James Orphanides, Centurion Holdings, Cushman & Wakefield, Dimes Savings Bank of Williamsburg, Douglaston Development, DDG Partners, Eastern Consolidated, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, Friedman, LLP, Accountants and Advisors, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, LLC, Genova, Burns and Giantomasi, Grubb and Ellis, Investors Savings Bank, Jack Jaffa and Associates Real Estate Consultants, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, Madison Realty Capital, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Meridian Capital Group, Margolin Weiner and Evans, LLP, Certified Public Accountants and Business Advisors, Newmark Knight Frank, RAL Development Services, The Spandrel Group, LLC, Siami Development, SJP Properties, Site Comply, Sterling and Sterling, Stephen Napolitano, The WITKOFF Group, Urban American.